7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Howdy, CROC Nation. Dr. Tommy and Ellie here with you with another amazing CROC podcast. I use the word amazing because you guys are amazing. Angel and I are thrilled and honored and privileged to bring information to you guys each week. Angel Santana, have faith, let it begin on the other side of the computer glass. How are you, my friend?
I am good. A little disappointed with the groundhog.
Oh, you want more winter?
No, I'm upset because we keep getting more winter, and he said spring was here.
Yeah, we're getting hammered here in the Northeast, but you know, this is old-fashioned winter,
That's
actually with snow. So we'll
But I
see.
feel good, my friend.
I'm very happy about that. I have a really cool podcast today. It's going to be very short. It's going to be very sweet, and it's about a subject very near and dear to my heart.
And that's always a pleasure too, because anytime you have something that comes from your heart, you know, I know it's it really makes it truefold, because we make up words here, right? Because you don't like to give yourself a pat on the back, because you always put the patient first. But you know what? When you say you're about to give something that's near and dear to your heart, I think everybody should strap on their seatbelts and get ready for an amazing ride.
Yeah, thank you, Angel. And I think that one of the reasons why I'm so what would you say, excited about today is that I read an article, and it was such a good article. It was an article about physicians' dress, how they dress, and how it affects patients' perceptions. And you know the way I roll, right? You know, I wear a jersey to work every week, and it's very unusual. It's very unique. And so articles like this that put into question, you know, physicians' dresses, you know, dress code or whatever, and how that affects patients, you know, gets an automatic read from me. So the paper we're going to look at today is from a Dr. Chris Petrelli from University of Michigan, and it's really a very good paper. And the other thing I wanted to say, Angel, is that we learn lessons, things that we think we know, we don't always know. For example, when we started this podcast, we called everybody a survivor, and we did an entire module on defining survivorship. Then we come to find out that not all cancer patients want to be equated with the word survivor. They prefer to be equated with the word thriver. So, you know, we had an open mind and we checked that out. And we use that actively in our podcast. A couple of weeks ago, we read an article about how patients don't like to be linked to the word warrior. Again, that would have been something I would have thought that I did think was a positive thing, but sometimes it's not a positive thing. So when I read Dr. Petrelli's article, I did want to keep an open mind and hear different perspectives, because to be honest with you, you know, my perspective about wearing a jersey every day is a very positive perspective and a very positive experience for me and my patients. But I didn't want to just, you know, stick my head in the sand and not give equal time to other thoughts. So I'm going to begin, Angel, with the story of CROC and our 4 pillars, and then get into how the jerseys came into being. And then we're going to kind of put it all together, evaluate this paper, and then there's another paper that is sort of the contrary to Dr. Petrelli. Does that work for you, my friend?
Works excellent. Let's rock and roll.
Okay. So as I've told the story on this podcast many times, I started doing radiation oncology in the late 1980s and started to really become extraordinarily connected to the patients. Felt really connected to them. Felt very indebted to them for all the lessons that they taught me, both as a doctor and as a human being. And it was very evident to me that just being a good doctor wasn't going to be enough. So sitting on the beach when my kids, who are now in their 30s, were, you know, when they were less than 5, and watching them build sandcastles on the Jersey Shore, it kind of struck me that I had to kind of do something more than that, than just be a good doctor. I had to do something to support our patients. And that was the initiation of this Citizens Are United to Overcome Cancer. And really, the 4 pillars that I put together back in the 1990s were simply to engender informality, disseminate information, encourage approachability, and demand accessibility. And I think these all blend very well together. And then as CROC was becoming, a very big movement in the Hudson Valley for cancer survivors in the 1990s and the early 2000s, before all of this internet, support groups and all of these other mechanisms for survivors, I was able to identify with each of these four pillars. And then one day I wore a Ivy League sweater to work. It was a Columbia sweater. I went back to school, to learn some stuff I missed in college, like literature and writing and history and things. And I was at Columbia and I saw this sweater and I bought it and I wore it to work one day on a cold winter day. And the patients went crazy. They loved it. So then I got a couple of other sweaters, the Ivy League collection, I call it, and they loved it. And then I went back to the whole, shirt and tie thing, and they started yelling at me. And thus the 300 jersey collection began. And I don't think I've ever not worn a jersey to work. So that's how the jerseys started. And the jerseys were really a manifestation of how I can help uphold those four pillars of our cancer support philosophy. Again, engender informality, disseminate information, encourage approachability, and demand accessibility. And I got to reading this article, which we'll talk about, and started thinking about just what is the history of uniforms. So cavemen, cavewomen, they'd kill a saber-toothed tiger or a woolly mammoth, and they would make themselves some clothes to put on them so they didn't freeze to death. Then all of a sudden, we started getting uniforms for soldiers. The Roman legions, they would have a prestige and a recognition about them. Different types of uniforms would signify, higher ranks. And then we think about our policemen and policewomen and firemen and firewomen and the uniforms that we expect to see them wearing. And then we have our professions, our lawyers and Wall Street people who wear, their expensive Brooke Brothers suits. That's their uniform du jour. And then we think of our sports heroes who wear their own types of uniforms. So there is a mystique to these uniforms, to the way we dress and the way we present ourselves in our lives, especially in our work/professional lives. And doctors have that added mystique. Especially doctors who have specialized skills like the neurosurgeons and the trauma surgeons and the ER doctors who have the ability to hold life, literally in their hands and give life and steal life out of the jaws of death. And, I think patients historically have always, envisioned their doctors to be serious minded and to be a little bit, above humanity, maybe not a god, but certainly, in rarefied air. And I think the perception and the desire to see their professions, their professionals, their doctors, their caregivers, dress in an appropriate way is certainly understandable. And the study that we were talking about from Michigan had 4,062 patients, and they had four categories. So casual wear could just be, pair of khakis and maybe an open shirt, short sleeve, tennis sneakers, no white coat. Scrubs, we'll talk about that, with or without a white coat. Formal dress would be a suit for a woman, a physician, female physician, and for a man, sort of, the blue dress pants with the dress shirt, long sleeve dress shirt with a tie, with or without, without a jacket, with the white coat. And then formal business would be, one of those nice suits, as I said, from Brooks Brothers. And the way the study went, which again I found fascinating, is I call it the 1/2 and 1/3 rule. Half of the people that were interviewed, they wanted their doctors to be in formal wear, and 1/3 felt that they were influenced on what they thought of their doctor by what they wore. So with the exception of the emergency room, where they felt that a scrubs with a white coat was equally preferable. Some of the problems with the study, Angel, is that it wasn't broken down into specialty, and it was okay for less formal wear on weekends, but no difference between being formal or not formal in a hospital or office-based practice. Not surprisingly, the Northeast and Midwest were a little more relaxed about casual dress as opposed to the South and the West. So that's the way the paper went. What's your initial instinct on what I told you, Angel?
I find it fascinating because I think that to me, I don't know why I keep thinking this, but I keep thinking of the phrase growing up, do not judge a book by its cover. But what I'm trying to get at is, you don't have to have that meaningful white coat or slash tie, shirt and tie. It's everything we've ever discussed from the beginning of this whole CROC podcast, and that is getting to know who your doctor is. And I think it allows you the opportunity to break the ice just based on what the doctor can bring to the patient by the first initial reaction.
Very beautifully said. And then let's talk a little bit about the story of the white coat. You know that I'm as anti-white coat as anybody. As a matter of fact, there's a medical condition called the white coat syndrome, where you walk into a doctor's office and a person who never had high blood pressure in their life all of a sudden has high blood pressure. So I mean, we have to be careful here. And we'll talk about the study and what it represents to me. But it is interesting looking at I guess the evolution of the white coat as far as where you are in your training, kind of like a soldier. The private and the corporals have a certain, number of stripes they wear, and then you have your second lieutenants and your lieutenants and your majors and your captains, and then your colonels and then your generals, each of them wearing a different sort of outfit, but within the same, genre as the general outfit. And we start, and it's such a fascinating and exciting day when we buy our first white coat, and it's a short coat, and we wear it in our third year, and it's white and it's starched and it's beautiful. And we're so proud of it because now we're out of the classroom and we're into the clinics and into the hospitals, on the wards and in the floors. And then we're with, the interns and the residents, and the chief residents, who have a medium length white coat. And then the attendings have the white coat, almost like a superhero cape, that goes from the shoulders down to all the way down to the floor. So that's kind of the prestige process of the white coat. And then you also have to look at the story of the interns, what the interns used to dress like. So in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, all the interns would be in white. They'd have white pants and a white shirt. They'd have white shoes and have the white coat. And then in the 1970s, 1980s, when I was coming up, it was a little less formal than that. Many of us still wore the whites. But you were starting to get into the scrubs then, because people were then letting us wear scrubs, especially if we were on call and we were going to be up all night or whatever. And so things were kind of changing, but it's a really interesting history and something that I look back on with great nostalgia. Back to the study. Again, some of my concerns and issues with the study. Number one, Angel, like, we've heard this before. The entire study was done, 4,062 people with young, slim and slender Caucasian doctors. There were no Asians, there were no African Americans, there were no
Right.
Hispanic. It was just, your white bread, Wonder Bread, 1950s doctor, right? Number two problem I had is that I have a problem when people use the word professionalism and feel that they're equating professionalism to a specific characteristic, rather than a performance. So if a person could be considered professional or unprofessional, that has the potential of creating a rigid, I'm going to make up a word as well as you did, ungenuine, so not real, a very unfocused and poorly prioritized model. So if we're putting this as what we're dressing like, and we're equating it with your professional, if you're wearing a formal, suit and tie, and you're unprofessional if you're wearing a jersey, I think that's going to get us into trouble. And I think that this rigid view of how We dress what we're allowed to say, how we are supposed to behave or act. That's going to actually cause more of a distance between the doctors slash caregivers and the patients. And I think you would agree with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the other thing is professional dress is actually disgusting if you want to know the truth. The long sleeves carry germs, right? Not for nothing, but scrubs, I see my colleagues wearing scrubs. They get very lazy. They're wearing dirty scrubs. The white coat is not that pristine white coat that I bought that I wore to my first day of third year, and it was starched and it was perfect. I mean, the white coats I see in the hospital are stained and they're smelly and they're awful and they're full of bacteria. It's a germ propagator, right? So the long sleeves, the ties, the white coats, they're smeared with the humanity. Scrubs make us lazy. Let's face it, scrubs are freaking pajamas. That's what they are. And because of the comfort, according to the paper, people want to see doctors in scrubs because it gives them more of a perception of professionalism. But that's actually, I think, the opposite. I think scrubs are the easy way out. When I'm in the OR on occasion, I wear my scrubs and then I come back down to the office. Boy, I say to myself, I would love to just stay in these scrubs all day, but I can't. I have to put on my real clothes and really put effort into it because my jerseys are pristine. I have an entire basement dedicated to my jerseys, and the way I won't let anyone touch them. I won't let anybody wash them. I mean, I literally am like they're my wedding dress. They're like my bridal gown. So no one takes them more seriously than I do. And you have to understand dress codes too. I went to an all boys technical high school where we had to wear a shirt, a tie, and a jacket. And it was a joke because we were all poor. We had to buy hand-me-down stuff. They were absolutely awful. They were polyester with all these synthetic fabrics. They were as cheap can be. We looked like a bunch of winos. We looked terrible. And that was the dress code. But according to the paper, that would be good. That's what they want. And I hate to diss my colleagues, but doctors have a tendency of being very cheap. I see very seldom a colleague who I really love what they're wearing or really think what they're wearing is fantastic or high quality. I mean, these are the worst suits they probably get 3 suits for $100 at fast, Carmine's down in Brooklyn or wherever they go to shop for these things. But believe me, when you talk about formal dress, I think what this doctor had in mind, was this really nicely dressed physician who actually put money into their wardrobe. Believe me, doctors do not put money into their wardrobe. I can promise you that. The other thing I want everybody to beware of is beware of what's called methodological rigor. So methodology is the way you do a study. So studies could be either quantitative or qualitative. A quantitative study, which is the one that I love, that's all numbers. That's all statistics. You have 100 patients, you give drug A. You have the next 100 patients, you give drug B. Then you do all sorts of observations and you draw blood or you get whatever your metrics are that you're trying to get. And then you put it in, you give it to your statisticians and you try to see if treatment A is better than treatment B. Qualitative research, on the other hand, which this paper happens to be, is exactly the opposite. It's just warm and fuzzy. I call it a wine and cheese party. You're basically just, asking people their opinions. And, at the end of the day, you're trying to fit a round block into a square peg, right? Who really cares? Like when they're given these questionnaires. I don't know about you, Angel, but I don't really take them that seriously. I do them just to do them. If a guy comes and hands me something from DoorDash, I'm going to give him 5 stars, whether he's the worst, delivery man or the best delivery man. How legitimate are these responses? Are they really, isn't it just like a thumbs up or a thumbs down on social media? And they're talking about methodological rigor. And it actually, that makes me not only laugh, it actually scares me because you're applying hard science and statistics and making brash generalizations and recommendations, which are actually potentially dangerous and may stifle originality and thoughts on the vanguard and ideas on means to make our survivors have a better experience. I think they're going to try to, try to eliminate or at least, stifle that process. And I think you have to also beware of patient satisfaction surveys. And Angel, I will have you comment on this because we have to do surveys for the hospital and all the consultants that come to talk to us. People who do these types of studies, and more importantly, the people who act on the results of these studies, are really, and here's a nice word, bureaucratic wombats. That's what I'm going to call them. I find them to be dangerous. I don't think they're genuine. I don't think they're caring. I think they do it to look good. I think they do it for PR. I think they do it for advertisements. And I think they want to get reimbursed by Medicare or Medicaid or whatever. So that's kind of my position on it. I wanted to get your thoughts.
Wow. I mean, honestly, I don't think I have I don't think I have a full comment on it other than I think that good feedback is good feedback and bad feedback is also good feedback. There really isn't an in between. I think for me, it would have to be, I think that when you're trying to get when you're trying to get better as a corporation, as a company, as a person, you have to limit the questions so that they are directed mainly to the reasons of why you have gotten previous negative feedbacks from. And I think the problems today were that more questionnaires, more feedbacks are drawn corporately rather than individually. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. And you do feel the danger, right?
I do, because I don't think that they're actually hearing the problem. I think they're trying to mask it by asking questions that don't apply to what the areas are needed to be focused on.
Exactly. And I think you would agree that and I'll get to this in a minute. People need to earn a patient's respect, not just, demanded of them because they're dressed well.
Absolutely.
So the study I'll conclude with is sort of a study that started in the same way, but this was done with a palliative care cohort of patients. It was done at MD Anderson. The author's name I'm going to mess up, but it's Ashan Azari. 105 patients at MD Anderson in Houston, and they actually had a premise, and this is where I was saddened, but it turned out okay. The premise was patients would perceive formal attire as a more compassionate. Their doctors, if they were dressed formally, they would be more compassionate. But I am happy to hear or to share with you that doctors' attire actually did not affect the perception or the level of compassion, professionalism, or preference. So that was sort of a counter study to the University of Michigan. And just in ending, my views are very simple. The cancer patient remains a unique individual whose diagnosis deserves its own set of categories and sensibilities. And number two, professionalism, empathy, and caring and competence are earned by your works, by your words, by your actions, by your training, by your education, by you keeping up with your education, and not what the patient wants the doctor to wear on their back, but rather their acts, who they are and what they're trying to do for the patient, and whether they're genuinely concerned about the patient. And finally, I still believe in my heart of hearts, much respect to the University of Michigan and to Dr. Petrelli, and I appreciate his study because I do want to keep an open mind to everything. But as it relates to cancer, if we want to keep those four pillars which hold up, which are the foundation of cancer survivorship and cancer care, and they, again, just to say it for a third time, to engender informality, to disseminate information, to encourage approachability, and to demand accessibility, I think there's no better way of doing it than being yourself, expressing yourself, being happy with yourself, and then bringing all that to the table to your survivor/thrivers, whether that be wearing a jersey every day as long as it's clean, whether it's wearing scrubs, wearing a beautiful suit, wearing a barrel, whatever it is that you want to do, as long as you could achieve and earn the respect of your patients. That's really, at the end of the day, my position. Angel Santana, you always get the last word.
Well, as we're here at my home, as we all know, we are I'm over here with my son Noah, who the minute you started saying those quotes started making comments, and I says, you know what, Noah, you raise a good point. At 2 years old, I remember a quote that not at 2 years old, but I remember a quote that he reminded me by just saying, his mumbling, and that is, a good physician treats the disease. The great physician treats the patient who has the disease. So it doesn't matter what they wear. It doesn't matter what great practice they come from. The ultimate thing is how they interact with you, the patient.
Well said, Angel Santana. My gratitude is always for being my valet, being my best friend, being my co-host, and helping our survivors. Board of directors, we're going to be getting together soon. Don't eat between now and April 3rd. We'll have a great meeting to help our survivors/thrivers. Here's our pep talk. You guys got the diagnosis. It's time to go into the clinic. It's time to meet your doctors. It's time to meet your oncologist. It's time to meet your surgeon, time to meet your radiation oncologist, time to meet your nurse practitioners and your nurses. You go in there, do not go in there with any perception of what you think what your doctor is going to look like. Let's think about anybody on this podcast who is married or is in a serious relationship or a committed relationship. You had in your mind before you met this person that you love a certain look or a certain, color hair or color eyes or body type or whatever. And you probably ended up with somebody completely different, maybe 180% opposite. I ask you to do the same for your doctors and your caregivers. Don't look at what we're dressed like. Don't look at what we put on our backs. Look at what comes out of our mouth. Judge us for how committed we are to you. Judge us on how sincere we are about helping you, and judge us on our acts of kindness and excellence, not about whether or not we're wearing a Brooks Brothers suit. To the board of directors, we thank you for all of your self-sacrifice on behalf of our survivors/thrivers. And of course, we end this podcast as we end each of our podcasts, and it's with a prayer and a blessing, hoping and wishing everyone out there has a long, healthy, happy, and cancer-free life. God bless you. God be with you. Peace.